Hi, this is William, and I'm going to show you how to install a VMware ESX server on a MacBook Pro running VMware Fusion. This can also run on a Mac Mini, a Mac Pro, and so on, as long as you're running OS 10 on an Intel Mac with the latest version of VMware. So first thing you'll notice here, we have two machines in the ESX lab. One is a VMware Virtual Center server that we'll use to configure the ESX server, and also a Red Hat Enterprise Linux server that is going to serve as an NFS server. So instead of having a SAN attached storage or shared SCSI, we'll use a network file system to become our shared storage. And this will be useful later when we do things with HA and vMotion. So the first thing we'll do is we'll click New, and we'll create a new virtual machine like you would normally would in VMware Fusion. You'll go ahead and we'll continue without a disk, and we'll use an ISO that we downloaded from VMware. The specific version we're running is ESX 3.5 update 2. I tried update 3 with some issues. Didn't seem to work out well configuring shared storage. Did the exact same install with update 2, and it worked just fine. So it may have been a version bug. So we'll choose that ISO and then click continue. And you'll notice that it is detected as a Linux operating system. That's fine. Just click continue. For the Linux to easy install, we're going to disable this. We're going to do the install manually. Click continue. And before you click finish, what we'll need to do is do a customize setting option here. This will let us edit the settings before we actually power on the VM. This area here is asking us where we would like to save the VM guest. For this purposes, we're going to save it on this volume here. It's a USB drive under Virtual Machines, and we're going to call this server ESX Lab-ESX01. Click Save, and it'll save it into our configuration. You'll notice here, and it's opened up the options for this particular VM. One thing that you'll want to do is go into Processors and RAM and choose 2 processors. It's very important. The RAM here is fine. A gig of RAM for the machine is fine for our purposes. And for networking, instead of using NAT, we're going to use Bridged, which allows direct connection to the Mac's airport or whatever the default network connection is. We're also going to come down here to other devices and remove serial port. This is not necessary, but it's a resource that we won't be using, so we're going to remove it. Okay, so that is it for actually creating the VM. However, there is one thing that we'll need to do before we actually power on and install VMware ESX. So what you'll want to do now is close Fusion, and we will want to go to the volume where we save that disk, that VM, highlight it. This is the VM that we created. We want to right-click and show package contents. This will show all the files that are associated with that particular VM. The file that we need to edit is one here called ESXLab ESX01.vmx. .vmx is the configuration file for this VM. So what we'll want to do is right-click, and we want to open with Other, and we want to open this up with a text editor. For the Mac, we'll just use TextEdit. We can close the window behind here. So in this example, what we need to do to make VMware ESX run properly is we will need to edit a few lines in the config file. The first that we want to add here is we want to tell VMware Fusion that we are using or emulating an E1000 Ethernet adapter. What that is it's an Intel Pro adapter. So what you want to do is you want to take this line and copy it and paste it anywhere in the file, really, but I like to keep them organized into one section, so I put it right underneath the Ethernet 0 statement here. The next thing we need to do is we need to add this other line that says Ethernet address type equals generated. Okay, we can put that right underneath the line we added. The other line we need to add is to tell VMware that we're using a SCSI LSI logic device driver. You'll notice that it is already in there, so we're okay. We don't need to do any other changes. Virtual device is already set to LSI logic, so we're fine. And then these two lines we'll need to add anywhere in the file. I typically will add them at the very end. You can just tag them onto the bottom here. Okay. So that's it. We can go ahead and save this file and then close text editor and relaunch VMware Fusion. And if there's any errors in the file, if there's any errors in the configuration file, you'll notice that in this area where there are notes, it'll actually tell you what line there's an error in. So before you power them on, you'll notice if there's no exclamation mark here in the black screen area, and there's nothing, no text here, the machine is pretty much configured properly. So all we'll do now is go ahead and power them on. And if all goes well, the normal ESX install will crank up, which is going to boot off that ISO. What we're going to do now is go through a standard version, a standard install of ESX 3.5. We go ahead and hit enter, and we'll walk through the installer. So right now Linux is going to boot. The first thing it's going to ask us is do we want to test the ISO image. We can skip this portion. Okay, so here is the very familiar ESX Server 3.5 graphical interface installation. So we just choose next. We're going to use a US English keyboard. We'll use a wheel mouse, PS2 wheel mouse, which is what's been detected. It says here that the partition table is unreadable. That's fine. We want to just wipe out what's ever on this disk. So we choose yes. This is not hurting the Mac at all. This is just fleshing out the disk contents of that disk. We want to accept terms in the license agreement. And we're going to go through a standard partition of VMware. Typically, of ESX. Typically, you would go through here and make changes to your partition types, your disk slices, and so on. But we're just going to choose the recommended disk partition scheme. Choose next, and yes, we want to remove all those partitions. We want to go ahead and accept the defaults here. This is a partition layout, but we're going to just take the defaults here, choose next. We're not going to edit any bootloader configuration, and we're going to set this up. Typically, I would never do this, but we're going to set up with DHCP for this purposes. So we'll get an address from my NAT router out on my network. Leave the other settings default. We're going to choose location. I'm in Central Time, so we're going to choose America, Chicago, which is Central Time. We're going to set the root password. We'll just use the word password here. And choose Add Next. And choose Next again. This is a review of our install. We'll just choose Next. And now the install will start. So we'll let the install start and finish up and reboot, and we should have a working ESX server ready for use. So just to reiterate, what we're installing is into a VM virtual disk file on this USB drive. This is in no way running like boot camp or anything. This is just running in a VM. So anything that we do to the disk is not affecting the Mac or any other VMs running on the system.